This is our 8th meeting of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development.
October 22nd, the committee will resume the study of vulnerabilities created and exacerbated by COVID-19 and crisis and conflict-affected areas. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would encourage all participants to mute their microphones when they are not speaking and address comments through the chair. When you have 30 seconds left in your questioning or speaking time, I will signal you with this yellow piece of paper. Interpretation services are available through the globe icon at the bottom of your screens. Maintenant, j'aimerais souhaiter la bienvenue à nos témoins.
I would like now to welcome our witnesses. We have with us Ms. Gillian Triggs, Assistant High Commissioner for Protection, Office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, and Peggy Hicks, Director of Thematic Engagement, Special Procedures, and Right to Development at the UNHCR.
With 5 minutes of prepared remarks. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you and all members of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development for this opportunity to speak to you about the disproportionate impact of the COVID-19 on the over 80 million people who are within the mandate of the United Nations Refugee Agency. These 80 million include 26 million asylum seekers and refugees and 47 million people displaced in their own countries. Perhaps the most powerful illustration of the impact of COVID-19 on peoples of concern to UNHCR is demonstrated by the fact that this year, the agency has had the lowest number of resettlements in 20 years, a historic low, with as many as 20,000 departures this year, barely a third of the usual resettlement numbers. So to begin, I'd like to thank Canada for the recent announcement of an increase of 4,300 places for resettlement and for private sponsorship over the next couple of years, and also for Canada's support for COVID responses with very generous additional funding for humanitarian and development work, with a special focus, as we'll see in a moment, particularly and importantly on women and girls. UNHCR very much appreciates Canada's leadership throughout the pandemic, being one of the first countries to restart resettlement departures after the temporary suspension of the program under the influence, of course, of COVID. Canada also, and importantly, employed technologies such as remote interviews. And of course, we're doing this now for settlement cases to ensure continuity of the program. Canada's also pioneered labour mobility for refugees as a complementary or regular pathway to settlement. Canada supported education pathways through a sponsorship model, and in a very significant initiative has developed the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative. This is by way then of saying that the continued leadership of Canada in this time of COVID is vital. The impact of COVID on the lives of so many refugees and displaced people has been a pandemic, exacerbating and compounding long and pre-existing crises, being a protection crisis, that in its magnitude and probable lasting effect reflects the root causes of global movements throughout the world. People flee violence and persecution from international and intercommunal conflict, poverty, inequality and gender discrimination, environmental degradation and climate change. The numbers are now unprecedented and rising fast. When so many vulnerable people are disproportionately affected by COVID, you might reasonably ask, why should we focus on refugees and other displaced people when nations are rightly concerned to protect their own citizens and residents? An answer lies in the fact that displaced people are especially vulnerable and are the most at risk in the communities where they find protection. They rely on the informal economy. Without legal status, refugees are the first to lose their jobs, to suffer eviction and to become homeless. Since the start of the pandemic, UNHCR has received alarming reports and consistently alarming reports of sharp increases in gender-based violence, trafficking, sexual exploitation, child pregnancies and marriages, xenophobia, and stigmatization. 80% of the world's refugees are hosted by poor and developing countries, where health systems are rapidly becoming overwhelmed and people live in crowded and unsanitary conditions. Older people and those with disabilities are less able to get medical services in lockdowns, and displaced children are more likely not to return to schools once they reopen, especially girls, setting back advances hard won over recent years. In addition to the social and economic impacts of COVID, we've seen that at the height of the pandemic, 168 countries closed their borders, nearly 90 making no exception for asylum seekers, risking refoulement to danger. We've also seen pushbacks of boats carrying asylum seekers, the denial of rescues at sea, or of disembarkation of those who have been rescued. UNHCR has been clear in saying that a nation has a responsibility to both to protect the health of citizens and to protect asylum seekers. One does not exclude the other. May I conclude by saying that a solution lies in the Global Compact on Refugees to build back better, as the Secretary General has proposed. The Compact makes a very simple principle: equitable sharing of the responsibility of displaced and stateless people. May I suggest, Mr. Chairman, that it provides a roadmap for the future, and one that in this globalized world we understand we must act together, and we applaud Canada's efforts as a leader in humanitarian responses. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Triggs, for your opening remarks. Now turn the floor over to Ms. Hicks for 5 minutes of her opening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for the invitation to speak on this important topic. COVID-19 has acted as a stress test for our societies. It draws into sharp contrast the weaknesses that we know are there, but not always may be visible, or at least maybe only at the periphery of our vision. Nowhere are those vulnerabilities more pronounced and the consequences more severe than in fragile and conflict or crisis-affected societies. The pandemic has resulted in a massive and multifaceted human rights crisis. It would, in fact, be easier to name the rights that have not been significantly affected than those that have. So profound are the consequences. Globally, we see an enormous surge in gender-based violence, nearly a doubling of the millions of people globally suffering from acute hunger, and disturbing impacts across the entire range of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. All of these impacts are further amplified in contexts of fragility, conflict, and emergencies where social cohesion is already undermined and governmental institutions are weakened and sometimes dysfunctional. Indeed, we see that in many contexts. Chronic underspending on health, water and sanitation, housing, and social protection has created immense vulnerabilities. Those gaps are all the more apparent and deep in conflict and crisis settings. Let me focus more intensively on 5 areas in which the human rights consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic are particularly disturbing. First, the impact of COVID-19 on already vulnerable people, as Ms. Triggs has already emphasized. Older persons, people with disabilities, migrants, and children already bear enormous and disproportionate impacts in crisis and conflict. COVID-19 has amplified those effects, acting like a cruel version of a heat-seeking device that targets those most in need already. Second, the consequences of fault lines within our societies based on race, ethnicity, or minority status. In different ways, in different locations, time and time again, we see that marginalized groups are triply harmed, facing greater exposure to the virus due to their jobs and living situations, facing more severe outcomes to the disease itself, and struggling more significantly to respond to the impact of COVID-19 on their livelihoods and lives. Third, the devastating effects of the pandemic on women. The manifold harms women are suffering during the pandemic are being felt from the richest to the most conflict-affected countries. We have seen tens of millions of additional cases of violence, a ratcheting up of already disproportionate burdens for child rearing and household work, a larger share of women leaving the workforce, and women at greater risk due to the prevalence in the health and service jobs. Fourth, the impact of a lack of access to adequate water and sanitation and adequate housing. In March, as campaigns grew across the globe, telling us all to wash our hands and stay at home, the reality remained that for more than 2 billion of the world's population are homeless and have grossly inadequate housing, and a similar number lack access to water and sanitation. Of course, those gaps are felt most particularly in conflict and crisis-affected areas. Fifth, and finally, the outsized effects of the digital divide. About half the world's population has no access to the internet. That digital gap, which is more profound for women and older persons, has always been a significant obstacle to development. Since the pandemic, we've seen how crucial digital access can be to education and health, and the life-threatening and altering impact of lack of connectivity. We also know that in situations of tension or crisis, even more people suffer through deliberate restrictions on access to the internet, including shutdowns. Not only are these impacts more severe in fragile and conflict-affected countries, they themselves serve to fuel conflict and social unrest and greater obstacles to stability and peace. It is a vicious circle where violence and instability aggravates COVID-19's impacts, and inversely, the pandemic feeds conflict, violence, and instability. Given those facts, the path forward today should be clear. This is a moment where support to countries in crisis or conflict has never been more important. The impact of the economic downturn in the developed world no doubt makes this commitment more challenging, but failing to meet this challenge will certainly be the more costly choice, both in lives and in resources. Just as the pandemic has been fueled by gaps in social protection, health, housing, and sanitation, conflicts are fueled by failures to address the root causes of violence, insecurity, and conflict, including human rights violations and inequalities. The conflicts we face, in many, if not most cases, are preceded by decades of human rights violations and built-up grievances, often documented by human rights mechanisms, but not sufficiently taken up by concerned states or by regional or by international organizations. We speak a great deal about early warning, but the real shortcoming has been our inability to truly invest the resources and political capital needed before situations reach a breaking point. It is not warning, but more effective early action that we need. The pandemic has provided a roadmap for building greater resilience to both pandemics and conflict. We build back better by investing in human rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hicks. We will now go into our first round of questions, and these are 6-minute time slots, the first of which goes to Mr. Genuis. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Triggs and Ms. Hicks, for your testimony, but more importantly, for the important work that you do. I am particularly concerned about the impact of COVID-19 on people facing arbitrary mass detention, the impact that the virus could have in those circumstances, and especially, as we've talked about before at this committee, the Uyghur Muslim community and what they're facing in China. So my first round of questions will focus on Ms. Hicks and on that particular issue. So Ms. Hicks, Canada's ambassador to the United Nations has proposed a UN investigation into whether or not the treatment of Uyghurs constitutes genocide. In your view, are the acts being committed against Uyghurs by the Chinese government constitutive of genocide? And secondly, is the forcible confinement of people in close quarters in concentration camps during a pandemic without the ability to socially distance and without proper access to health care, would that confinement and the associated circumstances be constitutive of genocide or of other definable international crimes?
So over to me.
Yes, Ms. Hicks, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question, a very relevant and important one in the current circumstances. Our office has done extensive work on looking at the issues of mass detention and incarceration during the pandemic, and in fact issued human rights guidance on some of the critical steps that should be taken to avoid the most severe consequences. And the High Commissioner herself has strongly urged for early releases in a broad range of cases in which continued detention was unnecessary. We have also emphasized that now more than ever, it is a moment where all those who are arbitrarily detained in violation of international human rights law to be released, because they now face obviously not only the risk to the loss of their liberty, but to the risk of loss of life, given, as you've commented, the extent to which the pandemic has an even more devastating effect within prisons and detention facilities. You've asked specific questions relating to our work relating to China and the Uyghur community. I'm sorry, sir, but I'm not actually, that's beyond my brief within our office and isn't within the remarks that I'm able to make to the committee today, but I'm sure our office would be happy to submit further statements in response to the questions if that would be helpful. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that response. And one of the things we do here often is we ask for written follow-up. So if you could, through your office, provide written follow-up to the committee about the specific questions around genocide and whether mass detention under the conditions of a pandemic could be seen as constitutive of genocide. So my follow-up question, and feel free to let me know if it doesn't fit within your brief, but I'd be curious to know, our Canadian ambassador has called on the UN Human Rights Council to investigate China's behavior in this respect. Unfortunately, China is actually a member of the Human Rights Council, as is Pakistan, Cuba, Saudi Arabia, and Russia. And I know, Ms. Triggs, in your previous work on for Human Rights Watch, you had made some comments about the Human Rights Council and its capacity to investigate human rights abuses in light of the presence of states with very poor human rights records on it. I wonder if you could speak to the role of the Human Rights Council. Is it capable of conducting a proper investigation in the case of the Uyghurs? And then more broadly, what role is it able to play or not able to play in light of the current circumstances?
Mr. Generous, just before we go to Ms. Hicks, we have a request from our interpretation servers. Ms. Hicks, if you could just continue to keep your mic as elevated as possible. I've hit the pause button, but I will now turn the floor back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and apologies for that. Thank you, sir. Yes, I'm happy to speak a bit on the role of the Human Rights Council in addressing crises such as that which you've described. The Human Rights Council does and has been effective in putting in place mandates relating to investigation in a number of situations that were not favored by the states that were going to be investigated. So it certainly is within the remit of the council and the potential of the council to be able to put in place a mechanism such as that. I'd refer you, for example, to the Syria Commission of Inquiry, which has been in place for, 7 years now, despite the objections of the Syrian government and others. Those resolutions are voted traditionally or typically, but it is the case that there have been a number of mechanisms of that sort, and they do very important work in investigating and exposing rights abuses throughout the globe. The council has 47 members, so it is not within the power of any one member to be able to block that type of action. It's a majority vote. If
I can just quickly sharpen that question, it's one thing with Syria, which doesn't have a lot of friends around the world. It's another thing with China, which has a concerted neo-colonial program to influence other states and influence the direction of international human rights deliberations. Are China's efforts to control deliberations, not just at the Human Rights Council, but in human rights bodies in general, are those hampering the UN's ability to respond to human rights crises around the world?
What I can speak to is what I see in my own experience, and that is that my office does not feel that we are hampered in that way. We are able to pursue our mandate to the full extent of the mandate. We speak out on crises across the world. We speak out on China, as we do on other countries when we see the need to do so. As I said, it is not the area in which I specifically work, but the High Commissioner is and has been discussing the possibility of an investigation and mission to China, and we can submit further information on the status of those discussions with the Chinese government, and would obviously appreciate support in having that type of work go forward in the future.
Thank you very much.
And just to quickly say, if I can, we'd welcome that follow-up.
Thank you for that. The next round goes to Dr. Fry for 6 minutes, please.
Good morning, and thank you for coming on this meeting. I'm saying good morning, but it's really afternoon in Ottawa, but I'm in beautiful sunny Vancouver, so it's morning for me still, which is noon. What the idea that there are 80 million refugees or people who are displaced around the world is a cause for concern before COVID began. COVID has now exposed all of the vulnerabilities. You're absolutely right, and everything you said are of great concern to us. But the question is that if we give temporary help, as you have, thank you for congratulating Canada. I am pleased at the work that we're doing. But the point is that we still have the real problems. Putting money, helping to get people food security, helping to give them housing, help them with education. All of these are essential things. However, what I want to know is, we have for instance, the OSCE region, which is the second largest region outside of the United Nations. We have countries that have closed their borders to persons who are stateless and who are displaced. And so there is nowhere for everyone to go. We know that today countries are using COVID-19 to actually deny sexual and reproductive health and rights to women around the world. My question is simply this. We understand everything you say. We've heard it from everyone else. But my question is, other than giving emergency funding, which Canada is pleased to do, what are the things that we can do, really practical actions that we can take to move forward to sustainability? This is not our last pandemic. Pandemics are going to come and go. How do we look at building sustainable infrastructure in these countries, healthcare systems, food security systems? How do we deal with this so that we don't have to each time treat every new pandemic or every new issue as an emergency? There are more people displaced today than in the World War I, World War II, Vietnam, and the other conflicts put together. So I would like to ask both of you, and I will let the chair decide who goes first, because that's his prerogative, to answer for me, what are the really sustainable things and permanent things we can do so countries can be self-sufficient, people do not have to leave? And of course, I could ask you what to do about conflict, but I think that's eluding everyone right now. But could you please answer? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Farron. We'll let Ms. Triggs and Ms. Hicks answer in the sequence of opening remarks. That's probably the easiest. Thank you. Sorry, Ms. Triggs, I think you're on mute.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the question. And I think it's one that people across the world are asking. As we see conflicts continue, new ones emerge, and old ones seemingly irresolvable. Although we are in peace discussions in relation to Afghanistan, it's been going for 40 years. The Syrian conflict into the 10th year. We've had countries like Turkey hosting 4 million refugees, generously for many, many years. Some then are very long term. In answering your question, I wonder if I could go back to, of course, the reason for the Refugee Convention, which was 6 years after the Second World War. In 1951, we had the convention that was dealing at that time with about 2 million people who were displaced. And it was thought that the Refugee Convention would essentially solve the problem. It would find a resettlement and a home for those 2 million. Here we are 70 years later, with much to celebrate in terms of those core concepts of the Refugee Convention, but dealing with 80 million and frankly rising as we speak. So the question, it must be the one that, of course, Dr. Fry, you're asking. What are sustainable solutions rather than temporary ones, which are ones of allowing access to claim asylum and denying, of course, any form of refoulement to danger? The answer, we think, lies in sharing responsibility, which, of course, is what the Global Compact on Refugees is designed to achieve, a shared equitable responsibility for assisting those host countries that are taking the burden. Mostly, 80%, in fact, of refugees and displaced people are in developing or very poor countries. So the burden is disproportionately faced, particularly at the moment in Africa. Huge numbers of people subject to the generosity of hosting countries in the near area. So what are the solutions? Sharing, well, it's a big word. What does it actually mean? I think we're looking now for financial support, but also for investment. UNHCR is an emergency agency. We can provide billions of bars of soap, emergency housing in Idlib. We can do the emergency work, but we're also moving now, working much more closely with investment banks, with governments, broadening the base of support to get investment to deal with what we all know are the underlying root causes: poverty, inequality. We need investment. We need engagement by the community as a whole.
Thank you, Dr. Farr. You've got limited time. We'll turn the floor over briefly to Ms. Hicks for additional comments, but then we'll have to close this round.
Thank you, and I'll be brief then. I think a couple of points that haven't come through entirely is that these aren't solutions that any one country obviously is going to put on the table by itself. We feel really strongly that part of what's been shown here is the need for multilateral solutions and for further engagement in a cooperative way across borders, across regions, to be able to come up with approaches that work and are sustainable. We do see human rights as one of the key elements in making sustainable peace and development work, as I've said in my remarks. And I would also emphasize that the final point is that we often do not have the data and the information that allows us to intervene and act as effectively as possible. So more work looking at the indicators and the data and monitoring, I think, is also a key point. Disaggregated data in particular on race and gender and other criteria. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hicks.
We go now to Mr. Bergeron for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you for
being with us. We are very pleased to have your contributions to our work. Yesterday was the International Day against violence against women, and that includes domestic violence against women and children, which we would have hoped would go down during the pandemic. But homes are a place that can be very protective, but also they are secret places where more study has shown that domestic violence has actually increased counter to what has shown up in the data so far. So Ms. Triggs pointed out to us that there has been less resettlement during the pandemic. So can we also assume that during this period there has been less indication about human rights violations, for example? But if we look more closely, perhaps, on the contrary, human rights abuses have increased around the world, especially because everyone is paying attention to the pandemic and not to what is usually done by the international community regarding the well-being of refugees and other human rights issues.
Gillian, did you want to go first on that? I think directed to you.
Peggy, would you like to go first? My French is not, I do sincerely apologize, but I'm afraid my French is not good enough to understand that question.
Sure, no, I'm happy to come in. Thank you, sir. We certainly agree with your question that we've seen, in fact, as you said, a rise in human rights violations during the pandemic in a variety of different ways. You emphasize the fact that women in close quarters are sometimes more vulnerable, and we've seen and there's been a well-documented upsurge in violence in the home. That applies as well, I would say, to people in care in a variety of ways, older people, people with disabilities, and others. We've also seen it happen with LGBT people who may not have a happy home situation, and that may also increase the risk of violence to them. So there's certainly plenty to be worried about in terms of a rise in human rights violations during the pandemic. I would also emphasize the extent to which the use by governments of emergency measures is something that, of course, we understand and has been very necessary and human rights law clearly allows for. But what we have also seen is that there have been numerous instances where states have used those measures in an overbroad way or in a pretextual way to abuse rights in various ways by cracking down on dissent, by going up against civil society, by taking measures that might have been hidden might have been more visible in other circumstances, but are now hidden behind the pandemic. So I think you're absolutely right that this is something that we need to watch much more carefully.
Monsieur Bergeron, I'm just hitting the pause button for 1 second to ask Ms. Triggs if you were to select English in the interpretation feature at the bottom of your screen, you should be receiving, hopefully, interpretation which would allow you to comment on either questions on either language. Let us know if that's not the case, or if you have trouble, we can see if we can get our technical team involved in this. Maintenant, la parole est à Monsieur Bergeron, encore une fois.
Mr. Bergeron. Madame Triggs, j'aimerais bien recevoir. I would really like to have your answer, Ms. Triggs. So, as Mr. Genuis mentioned earlier, we do have the possibility of receiving additional written information in answer to our question. So, I would appreciate it if you could send us an answer. A number of things have happened as a result of the pandemic, and we can imagine that they have had a very positive impact. But one of the things has been collecting more information about people's health. Now, there are new practices that have been put in place, new technologies used. Do you see any concern about these technological developments and these new measures to collect information from people as an infringement of people's human rights?
We've been following that issue pretty closely, and I think, as in many cases, when you roll out something quickly in the midst of a pandemic, it's not always the best way to make good policy. And I think we've learned a lot about the use of contact tracing apps and what are appropriate ways to safeguard privacy and data more effectively through using data localization, through making sure that the process is transparent, there are limits to how long data can be saved. All sorts of measures need to be in place when that type of technology is rolled out. And unfortunately, we've seen the consequences when they haven't been in place in a few places. So I do think those lessons learned really need to be put in place. There's also such a diffusion of the different contact tracing apps and the ways that they're being used that it would be good to have some cross-fertilization of that learning across contexts to make it easier for people to ensure that this technology is something that they can rely on in terms of their privacy and their rights.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Bergeron. Ms. Hicks, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron.
A series of questions in this round goes to Ms. McPherson for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much to both of our witnesses. This has been very interesting, and I have the pleasure of going forth. So many of my questions have already been addressed. So I'm going to focus a little bit, I think, on what my colleague from the Bloc Québécois has brought forward in terms of the impacts this has had on women. And you were very eloquent when you spoke about those impacts, Ms. Hicks, about the violence, the failure of women to be able to go back to work, the burden of house care and child care. What I'm interested in is how you would predict or how you would see Canada doing a better job or improving our role in addressing this, both domestically and internationally, because as my colleague Mr. Bergeron mentioned, this is not something that happens elsewhere. This is something that also happens in Canada. Ms. Hicks, if you could comment on that, and then Ms. Triggs, I might get you to comment on that as well, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you for the opportunity. I do think this is an area where more attention has been paid, but there's never enough engagement on these issues. So it is really important that we look at what's happening and try to outline clearly what types of responses are effective. One of the things we've emphasized is that when there is a crisis like that, this. We know that there is a need immediately for more referral services, more access for people for shelter. People need other options, even in the midst of a pandemic. And I think we were somewhat slow to roll those out and to recognize that need. And so both in Canada and through Canada support elsewhere, those types of solutions, I think, are very important. We've also seen, and this has been well documented, women's access to healthcare during the pandemic has been greatly diminished. And so, for example, women have not been able to easily access sexual and reproductive health and care, which has an enormous impact on their lives as well. So emphasis in that area, I think, is a second piece that I would urge Canada and other governments to look at. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Ms. Triggs?
Thank you very much. And I think that this question of gender-based violence in the context of COVID has really been one of the most disturbing impacts of COVID, because it's existed, of course, we all know, in all our societies, but COVID has shone a light on this, expanded our understanding, but also the lockdowns have increased family tensions, and we've seen an exacerbation of an existing situation. What do we do about it? In fact, before I mention what one might do, one of the things that's been so interesting is that in COVID, within weeks of COVID, we were getting reports from our call centres in many parts of the world, but particularly Africa and Latin America, where in one instance we were getting 10 times the number of calls on gender-based violence in these countries, and it's been true all over the world. It's not particular. So it's a very worrying phenomenon. What do we do? One of the things that at UNHCR we're doing is developing call centres. We're massively or very significantly increasing call centres to give greater access to women to call in. We can then provide mechanisms for getting out to legal advice, to health centres, to psychosocial support where necessary, to other services, social services. So we think that that's one way of achieving it in the context of a COVID that continues. Others are, as Peggy said, options, shelters. But perhaps what it comes down to ultimately is greater funding and stronger advocacy to ensure that funding is in place, not just as a temporary measure, but something which becomes a significant feature of the social safety net of all the systems and includes women in the environment of a pandemic. This won't be the last pandemic. There will be others, and this is a continuing and societal problem. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, and I might ask you my next question as well, Ms. Triggs. So that's particularly focused on what we can do in terms of violence against women, against protecting women around the world, particularly during this COVID time. In terms of refugees, do you feel that Canada is doing enough, and do you feel that we are doing our fair share? And if you aren't comfortable sort of commenting on that, what could we do more of, I suppose, would be another way of looking at it.
Well, I would be reluctant to answer that question in many cases, but in the case of Canada, I have to say I'm delighted to answer. You really are one of the top leaders in the world. There's no question about that. We all watch with great delight that Canada's held the line. You've understood the problem, and you've stood by your understanding of the need for resettlement, for monies that aren't always being expended in your own economy, but you've been prepared to provide funds in the COVID context internationally, and that's been vitally important to UNHCR. What more can you do? I listed a number of things that you're doing so well for us. I won't go through them again, but my reason for raising them is that you have a leadership position globally. You've stayed and delivered. You've been good to your values, and you are known for that. We at UNHCR would greatly value your continued advocacy. You have a credibility on this question that very few countries have, and so we would like to see that developed and maintained. If you could continue your advocacy on community sponsorship, on alternatives to measuring to dealing with these issues, but also advocacy for investment, for dealing with the root causes that we were talking about a little earlier. Yeah. In the end, to achieve sustainable solutions, we have to have meet this development nexus. We must invest and we must deal with the root causes, one of which, of course, you've raised quite clearly yourself on violence against women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Triggs. Thank you, Ms. McPherson. We're going to go into our second round now. I'll keep a fairly close eye on time. There should be sufficient time for each member of each party to ask an additional question in accordance with the negotiated times. The first two are 5-minute rounds. The next two are 2.5-minute rounds. So I would just encourage both witnesses and members to watch the time frame as carefully as they can. First round goes to Mr. Genuis for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Hicks, thank you for your earlier responses, and I would welcome written follow-up from your office on the situation in China, as well as challenges you are experiencing as a result of the Chinese government's efforts to redefine international doctrines around human rights. And I say as well, I would like to see Canada play a constructive role pushing back against efforts of authoritarian states to redefine established doctrines of international human rights, and the advice of your office on how to do that would be very helpful. And I would just note as a general comment that obligations under the Genocide Convention are for states. So regardless of the actions of UN bodies, states have obligations under the Genocide Convention, including the responsibility to protect. But my remaining questions are for Ms. Triggs. Ms. Triggs, we hear a lot in Canada from communities who are particularly following the human rights situation of members of their own community that are in other parts of the world, who often raise concerns about challenge accessing the UNHCR certification process. There are a number of cases where this would apply. It would apply to individuals, for instance, who are not yet refugees but still face persecution. People like the Sikh and Hindu minority community in Afghanistan, where there are big challenges. There are efforts to sponsor members of those communities, but they have a greater challenge accessing our refugee system because if they are still in country, they are not formally qualified as refugees. I'm thinking also about the situation of Pakistani minorities in Thailand who are often quite vulnerable. Sometimes they're in detention camps, but because I know you have limits operating there because Thailand is not a signatory to the Refugee Convention, as well as we hear about challenges from religious minority communities in the Middle East who may not actually feel safe in refugee camps. And I think this is important for you to hear because when there are some of the world's most vulnerable refugees, persecuted people that have trouble accessing a UN certification system, it leads to greater pressure for us to draw refugees from outside of that process. So I would appreciate your thoughts on this challenge and any feedback on what steps the UNHCR can take to better ensure that a larger proportion of vulnerable people can actually be identified and certified as refugees.
Thank you. And perhaps I could make that you raise a critically important question. I mentioned that there are 47 million internally displaced people. Internally displaced people are not refugees. So there are two completely different regimes. One being under the Refugee Convention for those who have fled their country. They are outside their country of origin and in need of protection. But the overwhelming majority of people now, persons of concern to UNHCR, are in fact the very group you're describing, internally displaced within their own country, where of course they're the responsibility primarily of their own state. What I'd like to do, if I may, because there isn't much time, is perhaps I could respond in writing to you on this question to make the point of the distinction. But they are part of the UNHCR mandate, not because they're refugees, but because they are internally displaced. And we have a strong responsibility, of course, to protect them. And I will, if I may, get back to you in writing shortly.
Thank you, ma'am. I would welcome further information in writing, but I do want to clarify that my question was not just about internally displaced people. It included internally displaced people, but I also mentioned the case, for instance, again, of Pakistani minority communities, Ahmadiyya Muslims and Christians who are in Thailand, who struggle to access the certification process, at least based on the testimony I've heard from many people in those communities. I'm sure best efforts are being made, but it's not just internally displaced people. It's also, from what we hear, people that are refugees who in certain contexts, either because because of the policies of states, challenges with UNHCR, questions of safety in camps, have trouble accessing that certification process. And that has implications for us, because if some of our refugee systems require people to be certified by the UNHCR, then they can't access those refugee systems. And it creates a greater pressure for us to not rely on the UNHCR certification process. So I know I've almost eaten all of my time, but I'd welcome further comments in writing. And maybe, Mr. Chair, we probably have about 15 seconds if there's anything you want to say verbally now.
Sure. Briefly, Ms. Triggs, if there's an additional comment you'd like to make, please.
We will certainly come back to you on that particular question you raised in relation to Thailand, and come back to you more clearly on exactly what the limits are on access to the refugee status determination process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Generous. Thank you, Ms. Triggs. The next round goes to Mr. Fonseca for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Hicks and Ms. Trigg. Ms. Hicks, the Office of the High Commissioner released a COVID-19 policy guidance for governments in April of 2020, stating, and quote, some safeguards must be put in place, including the respect of some fundamental rights that cannot be suspended under any circumstances. So, Ms. Hicks, would you be able to detail what some of those fundamental rights are for us?
Certainly. Thank you very much. Yes, you're referring to a guidance note that we did that looks at emergency measures and their impact. There are two different ways that states can derogate from human rights. The formal way, which is what you were referring to, which is under the convention, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, which allows certain rights to be derogated when there is a state of emergency in place that has been notified under the convention. Now, most places that declared emergencies did not actually go to that limit and did not try to officially declare a state of emergency and to move towards derogation. The types of rights that can't be derogated, for example, are the right against torture, things that under no circumstance could there be a justification for. But most states instead relied on the provisions of human rights law that do allow for restrictions that are necessary for public health. It is the case that restrictions exist for security and health under existing law. You just have to be transparent, non-discriminatory, and put in place measures to ensure that those steps do not overreach the necessity of the public health emergency. So it's that type of guidance that we've tried to provide, is to make sure that states do not move in a direction that overutilizes or is overbroad in the ways in which they restrict rights. And we've obviously seen that many of us have had our rights restricted by lockdown measures and other things that are consistent with human rights law. But we've also seen, as I mentioned earlier, that there have been instances where states have used such measures to disadvantage opposition groups, civil society, and others in ways that
have you seen that happening during this pandemic?
Yes, our office has documented instances where there were arrests and roundups of people pretextually. I could again get back to you with additional information.
Thank you.
It's been some such, but we've issued statements on those issues.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And Ms. Triggs, in a news release on November 19th, the UNHCR warns that 2020 will be a record low for refugee resettlement. You mentioned that current rates point to one of the lowest levels of resettlement witnessed in almost 2 decades, which is a blow for refugee protection. Which areas of the world are you seeing the greatest challenges with regards to resettlement, and what do you believe Canada's role in aiding these resettlement efforts should be?
Thank you very much. And of course, you're quite right. This is one of the lowest years we've had in more than 20 years, obviously in part because of COVID. One of the significant problems is that the resettlement countries are very few, and we have to broaden the base. We need more countries. We have something like 25 countries that currently allow resettlement, but the numbers are declining, although we have high expectations in some jurisdictions. I think it would be fair to say that overwhelmingly, we do not have resettlement through much of the world. We have about 25 countries that do. So one of the challenges for the future is to expand that. What is Canada's role? Again, I think it's very much one of advocacy. If Canada were able to talk to those countries with resources, with capacity to encourage them to set up resettlement programs or complementary pathways through education, labour mobility, family resettlement, reunion, and so on, then we would see that as really a key function that Canada could play.
Mr. Chair?
You have about 45 seconds.
45 seconds. So, Ms. Hicks, can you tell us a little bit about how marginalized groups, individuals are disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 and what's being done to tackle these inequalities?
Certainly. We've seen, for example, different problems in different places, but sometimes it's the case that minority groups, for example, don't have as much access to services or to information about the pandemic. But we've also, of course, seen in I believe in Canada and certainly in other Western countries and elsewhere that groups that have had less access to healthcare have had disproportionate impacts in terms of the impact of the virus, and the racial disparity that's been found in COVID response and impact statistics is really profound and is something that needs obviously a great deal of additional care and attention in terms of why it's happening and how we can best address it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hicks. Thank you, Mr. Fonseca. Maintenant, la parole est à Monsieur Bergeron pour...
Mr. Bergeron, you have 2.5 minutes. Mr. Chair, thank you, Ms. Hicks, for the answers that you gave earlier to my question. Now I would like to ask Ms. Triggs. Unfortunately, I don't have much time, so I will ask 3 questions, one after the other. If you lack time to answer those 3 questions, once again, I'd be quite grateful if you could send us additional response in writing. Ms. Triggs, we know that the High Commissioner works in collaboration with other sister agencies, UNRWA, which is the agency for Palestinians, for example. And we also know that some agencies, this one, have funding problems that is a challenge for their operations. So how can we solve that funding problems for a certain number of agencies that work in the field with refugees? And my second question, we've seen that some people were trying to leave Hong Kong through a seaway and were caught by Chinese authorities. How do you see the displacement of population to ensure the safety of people who would like to leave Hong Kong and find refuge elsewhere? And my last question, what can you tell us on the displacement of population in Nagorno-Karabakh?
I'm very, very sorry, but I'm afraid I do not have translation services and I can't answer that question. But what I will do is ask for the questions to be interpreted for me, and I'll make sure you get a proper written answer in due course. My apologies again.
OK, Monsieur Bergeron, il vous reste 30 secondes. Est-ce qu'il y a un autre commentaire, une autre question que vous voulez lancer?
À partir du moment où je sais maintenant que...
Well, now that I know that Ms. Triggs is not able to hear the interpretation and to hear the question, we will just wait for her, to have the question translated so that she can give us an answer. Thank you, Mr. Bergeron.
Goes to Ms. McPherson for 2.5 minutes. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did just want to follow up on what my colleague, Mr. Fonseca, had asked about. You spoke, Ms. Triggs, about the role that Canada has in terms of advocating, speaking to certain countries. Could you talk a little bit about which of those countries you are referring to? What are those countries we should be prioritizing? If you could be blunt and name them, please.
I really am reluctant to be naming countries. I think that's really not appropriate. What I can say is that we have 26 countries in the world that provide resettlement services, for example, and that most of those are very small numbers. We really need to broaden this base to get more support. The base is far too small, and I think there are obviously many, many countries in the world that don't have the capacity. but there are many in Europe, in in the northern hemisphere in particular, that do have the capacity. Some in the southern hemisphere, but I think this is where we need to give real effect to the principle of sharing in the global compact, to which 181 countries agreed. So that's really where we would see a potential for Canadian advocacy.
For us to do more of that effort. Thank you so much. And then I think I have my next question that I will put forward is around human trafficking and the impact that COVID-19 has had on human trafficking and whether or not that trafficking has been exacerbated during the pandemic. Perhaps Ms. Hicks, you could talk a little bit about that.
Thank you. Our expert on human trafficking has been concerned about the impacts, and we are looking to see more documentation of that. But there is a concern that, as one of the earlier questions put, some of this activity moves to the background in a way that makes it more difficult to address the problems that are being faced by people that are being trafficked. And there is a concern that anytime there is an economic downturn and greater risk, there's more potential for people to be pulled into trafficking as well. So there are certainly very big risk factors, and certainly an issue that deserves further attention from our perspective.
Thank you very much. And I believe that is the end of my time. So I'll pass it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. McPherson, thank you very much. That's perfectly timed. Colleagues, on our collective behalf, I would like to thank our two witnesses, Ms. Triggs and Ms. Hicks, for the time today, for their expertise, and very importantly, for their service on these very important issues around the world. And also, indirectly through you, our thanks to the service of your teammates, who we know are doing tremendous work. We will revert with some requests for written information, and we will now allow you to disconnect with our thanks and gratitude and allow our next panel to connect and be sound checked. And we'll suspend with that, Madam Clerk, for a couple of minutes. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. microphones when they're not speaking. Address your comments to the chair. I will signal when you have 30 seconds in your questioning or speaking time with this yellow sheet of paper. And once again, interpretation is available at the bottom of your screen through the globe icon. J'aimerais maintenant souhaiter la bienvenue à nos témoins panel. We have with us Plan International Canada, Tanjina Mirza, Chief Programs Officer, Vision Mondiale Canada, Michael Messenger, Président et Directeur.
We have World Vision Canada.
And also the Canadian Food Grains Bank, Paul Hagerman, Director of Public Policy, and Stefan Epkoop, Program Development Officer. And without further ado, and with my thanks for your patience, I will turn it over to Ms. Mirza for her opening comments of 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me and to speak to the committee today. COVID-19 has really increased the vulnerability, especially for children and girls in situations of conflict and displacement. Plan International, as one of the largest global child rights international development organization, we strive to end gender equality and promote children's rights everywhere. We work in contexts that are heavily burdened by crisis and conflict. As the global organization, Plan International's COVID-19 response in the past 6 has reached over 72 million women, men, girls, and boys with the life-saving programs in developing countries and countries that are facing crisis and conflict. Today, I want to highlight 3 key points. Number 1, COVID is deepening inequalities with a disproportionate impact on girls and eroding the progress that has been made so far on children's rights and gender equality. Number 2, the magnitude of the problem that we are facing in COVID, this pandemic, requires global holistic systems and system-wide approaches and solutions. Number 3, this is the time to ask for Canada's leadership more than ever before to advance the rights of children, especially girls. So let me elaborate the first point. So Plan International is deeply concerned about the pandemic's impact on children, especially girls. The consequences of the pandemic has been grave. Over 13 million children refugees and 17 million internally displaced children who are living in camps and often in very overcrowded settlements. What Girls in Crisis are telling us is that COVID has further worsened the existing vulnerabilities which the children have been facing. The risk of transmission of disease is very high in these overcrowded places. The education system is often inadequate. Even basic services like water and sanitation infrastructure is inadequate. Sexual and reproductive health rights are threatened. And the gender-based violence we are seeing an increasing in exponential rate in this COVID pandemic. Around the world, Plan has adapted its programs to respond to this pandemic in communities where we work. Our response aims to prevent transmission, mitigate the impact of COVID among the world's most vulnerable children in refugee camps, displaced sledding, and in conflict environment. So my second point, the pandemic is shining a light on the fragmented system that we have. A well thought out response requires a coordinated, integrated, a system-wide strategy, a whole of government strategy. This may seem like a tall order, but we all know that this is the effective way forward. Let's take an example, education system. Education system is a lifeline for children in crisis context. It is estimated more than 128 million children are out of school because of conflict and disasters. Every day a girl in crisis is out of school, she's at a risk of physical violence, sexual violence, psychological distress, and has lack of adequate nutrition. She faces increasing risk of early marriage, often post-marriage, child labor, trafficking, and armed conflict. Having been a refugee myself and have gone through crisis as a young girl, I can tell you that it changes the course of one's life. But I was fortunate. Through it all, my education remained constant. But most of the refugee girls and children, that is not the case. If the current trend continues, by 2030, only 1 in 3 girls in crisis-affected countries will ever get to complete secondary school. During times of crisis, all actors have to redouble and ensure that we have a robust system to protect and safeguard children, especially girls. My final point, Canada's leadership is needed now more than ever. Canadians can be proud of our global response to COVID, and global problems like global pandemic required robust, bold solutions. The pandemic has heightened awareness that the planet is truly interconnected. The prosperity of Canadians is linked with people around the world. Plan Canada welcomed the speech from the Throne's commitment to increase official development assistance. We look forward to seeing this committed being actioned in the next budget. This investment is urgently needed and with a timetable. In closing, as the world grapples with the crisis, new gender transformative pathways are needed to build back better. Plan Canada stands ready to ensure Canada's international COVID response carves a path that positively impacts the lives of millions of children globally, especially the girls who need it most and were often left behind. Thank you for the permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mirza, for your opening comments. Thank you. I'll now turn the floor over to Team World Vision Canada, Mr. Messenger and Ms. Gladding. Please, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for inviting World Vision to contribute to this important and timely study. I'm joined by my colleague, Lindsay Gladding, our Director of Fragile and Humanitarian Programming. Just by way of background, World Vision is a Christian relief, development, and advocacy organization, and we're working with children, families, and communities to overcome poverty and injustice. We're working in nearly 100 countries on the basis of need with no strings attached. We're grateful for the support of more than 650,000 Canadians and partners. Notre témoignage fait référence au
Our testimony makes reference to the first part of this study on humanitarian response and the second part to come. We're very pleased that you are focusing on the impact on children.
April 2015, I was in Nepal less than 24 hours after the devastating earthquake that caused so much destruction in that country. As I traveled around the region for the next 2 weeks, seeing how the disaster had caused pain, heartbreak, and need in so many places, every so often we'd feel the earth move under our feet again. We experienced many aftershocks, some nearly as powerful as the initial quake. And every time it happened, I knew that more families would lose their homes, more deaths would occur, more children would be left vulnerable. Even after the main earthquake was over, the aftershocks amplified the impact. And I'm telling that story because as we think about the earthquake that is COVID-19, causing incredible hardship around the world, we know that the initial health impacts, so significant, are only part of the story. For vulnerable populations, especially girls and boys in some of the world's toughest places, they can expect to experience ongoing aftershocks that will continue. Secondary impacts on health, well-being, education, and livelihoods that may be worse than the initial waves. In fact, as we've done our work and research on this, we've titled our research series Aftershocks for that reason. So with that story, I want to convey 2 key messages today. First, COVID-19 is setting back critical progress being made for the most vulnerable girls and boys through the pandemic and the secondary impacts. And second, Canada, like other donors, can play a critical role in the response through more agile, flexible, and integrated programming and funding, and by stepping up to the increased needs with higher levels of funding for urgently needed humanitarian and development efforts. I'll share very briefly about World Vision's global response. In March, immediately after the pandemic was declared, we started the largest humanitarian response in our 70-year history, building on our long-term community presence. The $350 million US response has already reached 55 million women, girls, and girls and boys by focusing on prevention measures, strengthening local health systems, and supporting children affected by COVID-19 through education, child protection, and livelihoods interventions. And of course, we work closely with bilateral and multilateral donors, including Global Affairs Canada. For example, Global Affairs provided an additional $5 million to an ongoing consortium, a 5-year health grant in Bangladesh, Kenya, Tanzania, and Myanmar. Being there on the ground with the pandemic allowed us and our partners to respond quickly. Because of the additional funding, we were able to pivot and scale up rather than create new projects from the ground up. And Canada certainly should be commended for supporting pivots like this, and we should do more. A key part of our COVID-19 response has been to address the pandemic's impact on children. We know over 8 months into the global pandemic, evidence shows that while children may not be at the most immediate risk from the virus itself, they are experiencing these indirect negative impacts. These are the aftershocks. We've had a chance to hear from children themselves, and we want to make space for their voices to be heard. A recent consultation that we did across 50 countries showed, for example, that violence has surged in the past year. 81% of those interviews say that they have seen or faced violence in their homes, communities, or even online since the start of the pandemic. And as we've learned from Ebola outbreaks in West Africa or DRC, and certainly following up what Ms. Mirza was saying, girls are particularly in jeopardy. Child and forced marriages on the rise, sexual violence, unwanted pregnancy. And these and other challenges are limiting their impact. I will conclude with 3 recommendations. First, Canadian support for programming and interventions must prioritize and address the pandemic's indirect impacts on children. As you conclude your study, I urge you to not only address the immediate health crisis, but also consider the aftershocks. Second, the Government of Canada can continue to lead the way to be more agile and flexible, to be more quick and effective in responding to a global crisis. We're dealing with the silos of short-term humanitarian response on one hand and long-term development on the others, with different funding mechanisms, support, expectations, and inadequate to recognize the shift as we address changing situations. We've had to pivot and adjust on the fly, but these funding systems often don't keep up. So we think there's work we can do to break down those bureaucratic hurdles, and it's a critical opportunity. Finally, increased needs require increased funding. While Canada has provided much needed additional funds for COVID-19 efforts, and we've certainly heard encouraging promises, the long-term challenges that we see will require even more ambition. And specifically, we urge the government to provide clarity on Canada's funding for international development by including a timetable of year-over-year increases to the international assistance envelope. And it's all because we simply can't allow the gains that we've made together to fight extreme poverty shrink or disappear because of a lack of resources to support the most vulnerable. So, Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. Nous vous remercions de votre attention.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Messenger. And our final set of opening remarks will go to the Canadian Food Grains Bank, Mr. Hagerman and Mr. Epcope. Please, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'll be speaking on behalf of the Food Grains Bank, and Stefan will be available for questions if necessary. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to appear, and I'm so glad that the committee is studying this important issue. I work with the Canadian Food Grains Bank. We provide food assistance and we support livelihoods by working through partners in about 30 countries around the world. And most of our experience with COVID comes from partners in 12 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Our partners tell us that the impact of COVID on people's health has not been as severe as we initially feared due to quick action by many governments and other factors, but things could worsen without continued vigilance. However, the knock-on effects of the pandemic and the government responses has had significant impacts on economies and on food security. In the first few months, we saw impacts across the food system. Farmers and traders lost income, perishable food went to waste, food prices rose, many households struggled to buy enough food, and food assistance programs were disrupted. By now, some of these problems have been resolved. Our partner organizations have changed the way that they work so that they can still do food assistance, still distribute food without increasing
Okay, Madam Clerk, I think we've lost Mr. Hagerman. Mr. Epcoop, would you want to jump in and take over, or should we see if we can get him reconnected quickly? Any sense of what the issue is?
So, Mr. Chair, he is frozen. Our technicians are working on it right now.
Okay. Mr. Epcoop, if you'd like, you could jump in and sort of make a couple of points from your end, and then we'll reconnect to him when he's reactivated.
Sure. Yes. So.
Testing.
I think he's back. I think you're off the hook. He's back with us, and the floor is back to you, sir. Please, Mr. Hagerman.
Okay. Do you how much did you hear? Can you give me an idea of where I should pick up?
I think you're about 2 minutes into your remarks, if that's helpful.
Okay, that is helpful. Thank you, and I apologize for the unstable connection. So some of the initial problems that we saw with the food system have been resolved. Our partner organizations have changed the way that they do food assistance to reduce COVID risk, but they're still distributing food. As in Canada, they've shifted from in-person meetings to communication by telephone and other means, but they're still keeping in touch with the people who need help. Nevertheless, the economic impact continues to be experienced by many households. From surveys of multiple African countries, we know that nearly 80% of households have lost income because of COVID. So just for example, that could be an Ethiopian man who used to work in Saudi Arabia and send money home, but his job disappeared with the lockdown. Or it could be a female small-scale trader who used to buy in Uganda and sell in Congo, but can't now because of the border restrictions. Or it could be a pastoralist who normally sells animals to people celebrating festivals, but the festivals have been canceled. This loss of income has increased food insecurity. For many who were struggling to eat before COVID, it's pushed them to crisis level. It's often worse for women because their jobs in the informal sector have been harder hit. COVID has brought another layer of stress on families, on communities, and on countries that were already facing multiple stresses, including conflict, which is the primary driver of food insecurity in many contexts, the desert locusts, and weather extremes. People who were already vulnerable now face another big shock. The economic downturn is having significant impacts on government finances. This will increase the debt burden, slow economic activity, and constrain the ability to reduce hunger in the coming years. COVID may be a short-term crisis, but it will have a very long tail, as many millions of people are pushed into extreme poverty. To respond to COVID, here's 3 recommendations for what Canada could do. First is don't think of this pandemic as a standalone crisis. The people dealing with COVID impacts are also dealing with other stresses. Our support should help them deal with as many of these stresses as possible. That means better linkages between humanitarian and development programming. And knowing how much hunger is caused by conflict, Canada should also seek ways to support both humanitarian and development work with an eye to reducing conflict and building peace. Second is Canada should support programming through local partnerships. This is important now when travel is restricted, but it's also important over the long term to build local capacity to ensure robust and ongoing support to respond to acute hunger in conflict and crisis contexts. We know Canada has already committed over $1 billion in new aid spending to respond to COVID impacts. We applaud this action, while we also recognize it's not nearly enough. At the same time, Canada has reprofiled hundreds of millions of dollars that was already in the aid budget for the COVID response. While this quick pivoting of aid resources was appropriate, Canada's aid budget is at its lowest point in 50 years, and the other needs have not diminished. So my third recommendation is that Canada should ramp up aid to help people overcome the crises that they were dealing with before COVID and commit new and additional resources to the COVID response. Thank you for your attention, and I would be happy to deal with any questions from the floor.
Mr. Hagerman, thank you very much.
Merci.
And what may end up being our only round of questions. There's 6 minutes each, and the first round goes to Mr. Diot, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and thanks for all the folks for being here and doing the good work that you do. Mr. Hagerman, I just wanted to talk about your remarks right off the top. I know that everybody on this committee knows that Canada has a great reputation internationally, but you did bring up the issue, as well as so did Mr. Messenger and Ms. Mirza, that we could do better. I mean, right now we know that that foreign aid has declined 10% under our current government, but we also know that there are great demands on finances right now for this country. But to any and all of you, perhaps, what would be the benchmark that we should be meeting? What do you think? Maybe Mr. Hagerman, you could lead off since you had the last word there.
Okay. Well, I think we know the gold standard is 0.7% of GNI. Canada is far from that now. We're at around 0.26, so around a third. We're about half the level of other OECD countries. I'm not suggesting we should go to 0.7 next year, but I would love to see a timetable and a commitment to reach that over time. And I think it's certainly reasonable that Canada should try to be at least average within the OECD in the next couple of years.
Anybody else have an opinion on that?
I'm happy to weigh in, Mr. Chair. Michael Messenger. Okay, sorry, I was looking for the nod. Yeah, we certainly agree, and I think another aspect of that, of course, is that for us, the actual numbers, of course, should be determined by the impact that Canada is hoping to have. It's key to clarify what additional funds would accomplish in addition to just looking at standards. Sometimes just a very practical piece, sometimes it's challenging even in the current envelope or as we look toward the future to determine what's new funding and what's additional funding. That's why we think it's not only important to look for a standard that we can aspire to going forward, but also get crystal clear forward-looking sense of the direction we can go, rather than perhaps just an announcement-based approach to international assistance, and more with a direction as to where we go. And certainly you've heard all of us mention just how an increase in aid is going to be needed as we look at the impact on extreme poverty that we've seen as a result of COVID.
May I answer as well? No, it's a great question. Thank you for that. I think following up on the two of my colleagues who have responded, it's really important that we are not doing piecemeal. It's not just the amount, it's how we actually deliver the aid, because some of these issues are root causes that have been festering for long, and this pandemic is not the last. There are more to come. So I think it's important that we look at multi-pronged, multi-year approaches to funding instead of piecemeal distributions and piecemeal funding. Because if we want to address the root causes of systemic challenges, lack of good quality, health system strengthening, education system strengthening, and especially with the gender lens, having a gender transformative approach so that girls especially are not left behind, we need to also not just look at the amount of funding, but how we are funding it. And how can we bring a multi-pronged approach to it? Because hopefully when there is another crisis, Canada will be proud to say we were able to address the root cause and this will not happen again. Because currently the systems are fragile. We need something more resilient. Thank you.
Mr. Diot, I think you might be on mute, sir.
Sorry about that. My mouse has a mind of its own. Just a more specific question: with the COVID-19, how has it impacted your organizations? Do you have a shortage of international aid workers? And just another quick question: I know that we don't have a lot of rapid testing here yet in Canada, but do you have access to it for your foreign aid workers so that they're healthy in the fight against COVID-19?
Let me jump in there first with just a quick answer. We don't actually have Canadians working overseas. We work with local partners, and so we have no shortage of people because they've been on the ground all the time anyway. We've actually seen increased resources because Canadians who donate to us have stepped up and been very generous, and so we have. We're continuing on trying to respond to the greater needs, but the health impacts have not particularly slowed us down.
Anybody else have?
From World Vision's perspective, there's no doubt that it has affected our work internationally as well as here in Canada. Like the Food Grains Bank, 99% of our staff are from the countries in which we're working, and so they're deeply committed there and committed to their communities, and so their work is going on. But they, like here, are subject to some pretty incredible restrictions, and it's made logistics very challenging for us. Here in Canada, Canadians continue to support us. We have had to stop and freeze a lot of our ongoing fundraising at the moment, and so it has been a challenge for us. But Canadians are indeed generous and understand the cause.
Thank you.
Do you want me to respond?
Sure, absolutely.
Yes, I think like the other two speakers, our staff in the front line are all local. Yes, they have been impacted because even in these countries where the COVID cases are rising, it's quite difficult to provide aid. So there have been some restrictions. So the programming oftentimes continue and then they stop and they continue. So we have to be very creative in how we actually reach the most vulnerable communities. And we have thousands of volunteers who live in those communities. It makes it easier, but nevertheless, they do have restrictions. It has impacted many other organizations. Plan has also been impacted because we do rely on generosity of Canadians. They have been very generous, but the need is so much on the ground that we do need a lot of support. And as we have all said, the numbers are huge, and the impact on especially the fragile conflict affected countries among the children has been so bad and we have the capacity to scale up. So we definitely need more resources to do much better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mirza. Thank you, Mr. Diot. The next round goes to Ms. Sahota, again for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'm going to start with Mr. Hagerman. All of the organizations do incredible work, and I've been following your work for some time and really amazed. Mr. Hagerman, I know that your funding was renewed back in 2016. Your organization's funding was renewed by Treasury Board in 2016 to previous levels of $125 million over 5 years. And I guess next year might be set to expire. With this funding, I know that you've also done really great fundraising work, and I think campaigns where the government matches the donations or quadruples the donations that you receive is always, I think, a great tactic. How has that fundraising strategy worked, and what different types have you had to use? Because you said your fundraising has actually gone up even through this pandemic. That's really great to hear. Have there been other tactics that you've used in order to do that?
Thanks for that question. You're correct that our funding from 2016 will end next year. We're currently in conversations with the government about renewing that, and we are optimistic of that continuing. The fundraising from the public, one of the great motivators from the public is to say, when you donate to us, then that funding is matched by the government for the work overseas. And as you said, for many types of programming, it's 4-to-1. And that is a huge motivator. Canadians are generous. They also feel that motivated by the fact that the government is doing this as well. And so that is
That's a strong part of our fundraising pitch. Not all of our overseas work is matched by the government. That's mainly our humanitarian work. We also do a lot of long-term development work, which, depending on the source of funding, some of it might be matched one-to-one by government or not. But that is still a key part of what we do, and we just try to demonstrate the effects of how this work has made a difference in people's lives in the field, and that seems to be very effective in mobilizing people to donate.
You had talked in your introductory remarks about supporting programs through local partners, and I know that you do a lot of your work in developing countries through locally based organizations. What advantages has this given your organization, and or what difficulties have you had throughout this pandemic with getting food to where it needs to go? Because we are hearing alarming numbers, and I know that Ms. Mirza, I think, also mentioned the doubling of need for food at this time.
I'm actually going to ask my colleague, Stefan Epkoop, to answer that, because he works directly with programs and is much more familiar with the work on the ground. So, Stefan?
Thank you, Paul. Yes, we do almost all of our programming through local partner agencies. These local partners experience many of the same restrictions that anybody else in those societies are. But the fact that those local partners are there means that we are not dealing with international travel restrictions. They're working with local suppliers. So by and large, not having to deal with cross-border transportation of food assistance, let's say. And as a result, and also have good relationships with their local governments, with their local health departments, and so able to get good information and up-to-date information on how to best implement their programming. And what we've seen is that local governments across the countries where we're working recognize that the food assistance that's being provided is an essential service, is a need that must be met, and have been very supportive of the work of our local partners to implement that. So we've seen relatively few disruptions on the humanitarian side in terms of our ability to implement. Some more disruptions on the development side, just given restrictions on group gatherings and so on. But have also seen our partners be really innovative and learn and identify new ways of implementing their programming through text messaging, through radio, through other means to reach the target audience. And yeah, they're finding new ways to implement programming because they know that context best.
Okay. I don't have a lot of time. I do have some more questions for you, but I also want to ask a question to Ms. Mirza about your campaign for Because I Am a Girl. I think it's a fantastic campaign, and I've spoken to many of your, I guess, young advocates for the organization before in my role. Can you speak to a little bit about the results and the impacts that this program has had, and in what countries have had the best impacts?
I think our program targeting girls and women actually is in everywhere because this is our basic strategy. So in over 50 developing countries where we work, empowering girls, giving them a voice and having work with them to provide all kinds of empowerment overall for the girls is critical. So education is a big program for us because I think if there's one really strong program that can bring the girls out of poverty, their families and their communities, it's about girls' education. It's a tremendous motivator. It helps enable girls get agency to fight their own, and it empowers them to do so. Girls' education program is a huge, I think, one of the best programs that we see. Sexual reproductive health and rights program has also been very powerful with this one. And of course, the economic empowerment for jobs creation for both girls and boys by targeting girls. My time is up, so I'll cut short. I've been given a yellow light.
If we had to put most of our eggs in one basket, do you think education, since you listed it off first?
Yes, education definitely is one of the best powerful, I would say, program ever for not just for poverty alleviation, for girls empowerment and agency.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Sahota and Ms. Mirza. Monsieur Bergeron, la parole est à vous pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Bergeron, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses once again, because your contributions will help us a great deal in our study. You represent non-government organizations and are our eyes on the ground to tell us how effective our aid programs are. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we haven't really had a budget. We've had economic updates, and we're going to have another one on Monday. The federal government has invested up to $800 billion. We don't know exactly how much, but we're talking about 4 to 5 times more than the government usually invests in a usual fiscal year. The Minister of International Development appeared on November 6th and said that government had allocated more than $1 billion to deal with the COVID effects internationally. $1 billion is 1/5 of what the government usually puts in the budget. We've recently looked at the main estimates, so it's only about 1/5 of what the government's usual development budget is. And then there is also a contribution to the UN. If the government has invested only about 1/5 as much as it usually does to international development and 4 to 5 times more for other things, do you not think that maybe there has been a drain from the actual COVID investment in the developing countries?
I was waiting for another to go first, but if I don't want to steal the limelight, but let me just start off briefly. Thank you, Mr. Bergeron, for your question. And I do agree that Canada's response to COVID, while it's been strong, it hasn't been strong enough. There has been a campaign by a number of organizations within Canada, but also in other countries, that the global response for COVID should represent at least 1% of the domestic response. COVID has demonstrated far better than anything in the past the interconnectedness of the world. We're not going to solve this problem in Canada unless we also solve the problem around the world. And so the $1 billion that has been invested so far is a very good start, but I definitely think that there's room for improvement. We know the needs are great, and we know that compared to what Canada is spending domestically, that is not nearly not a good mark to reach. Only $1 billion that it really should increase.
Est-ce que nos autres...
Would our other witnesses like to add something?
Positive that the COVID funds that have been committed are, in above existing commitments. But I join my colleague, Mr. Hagerman, in saying that we need to do more. It's a reflection both of not only the fact that it's the right thing to do as we think about where the most vulnerable are in the world today, but also until, one of the things that we have been pleased to see is that Canada stood up to say that we need to address things internationally as well as locally, because we are all connected. Increasingly, I think, as we think about the interdependence that's necessary in response, COVID is just giving us an example of where our typical relief and development responses, for example, blend together. The normal kinds of responses is going to require us to be agile and flexible, but it's not just going to be enough to repurpose the existing funding. It's going to be necessary for additional funding for us to make the kind of input that we have, and always focused on what are the long-term impacts and how are we helping those who are the most vulnerable.
Je dois dire que je suis pas sûr.
I must say that I am not surprised that you say we should increase the funding for the pandemic in developing countries, but my question goes further. What I fear is that part of the regular aid to international development, well, given the fact that the additional contribution was insufficient compared to the needs, and I fear that the regular aid was used to fight against the pandemic in developing countries, therefore impeding the satisfaction of other needs for which the money had been earmarked in the first place. Is that what you are seeing on the ground?
Maybe just responding to that, Mr. Bergeron, I think that first of all, I think at the moment, all of us would say in our humanitarian development response, the line between what is COVID response and what is not COVID response is pretty blurred because everything is so interconnected as we think about what this looks like. But it speaks to not only the need for additional funding, I think it also, you're actually raising a question, and this speaks to the way that our system is built, where it's difficult sometimes to be flexible in the funding that we have allocated to be able to respond so that we can not only focus on the initial needs, and we're fairly locked into that in our agreements with governments and donors, but also to be able to be agile as well. So it's both the amount, the impact, as well as flexibility within the envelope available.
Est-ce que d'autres témoins?
Would other witnesses like to add something? Otherwise, I would like to come back to a testimony that we heard from the director of the French-speaking part of the Red Cross. Mr. Sauvé said that we should stop being firefighters and we should build firefighter stations. So this means that we should stop giving fish. We should teach people how to fish. So is there anything else we could do to develop local capacities, local development capacities? In your opinion, did the pandemic contribute to the development of local capacities, or did it impede actually that effort in developing countries?
Yes, please.
I'm happy to jump in here if that's okay.
Sure. Just very briefly, Ms. Glading. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Bergeron. I would say that really our response to COVID-19 has highlighted the significant strength and capacity of our local partners and our local staff on the ground. We just recently completed a real-time learning. We interviewed more than 3,000 local staff members, more than 500 external partners, and thousands of community members. And what we are learning is that we were able to adapt to the situation on the ground very quickly, that we were able to build skills in humanitarian response in places that are, that we would normally consider to be stable development contexts where that humanitarian capacity may not have been built. And so COVID-19 and our response has enabled us to really strengthen our local capacity to respond to emergencies. And I'm very confident that work will enable us to be able to be more responsive to the next pandemic or next emergency that hits.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Glading. We'll have to leave it there. The final intervention this afternoon goes to Ms. McPherson for 6 minutes. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and it's such a pleasure to have our guests with us today. I've had the great pleasure of working with all of your organizations in my previous life, and so this is wonderful. I have way too many questions to ask you for 6 minutes, and so I may call you and ask some questions later on. To start with, I did want to actually talk to Mr. Hagerman, if I could. Paul, you talked a little bit about the gold standard being that 0.7%, and I just want to make it very clear that I don't actually consider that to be the gold standard. There are many countries around the world that have ODA at 1%. The 0.7% is actually what we committed to do, and we've, as you've mentioned, have gotten nowhere near that, and it is shrinking. but one of the things that I think is also important when we talk about the level of ODA is where that ODA goes. And I think it's so vital that it is used to support Canadian CSOs for a number of reasons. One is that it actually engages Canadians. And of course, the Food Grains Bank works a lot in Alberta, in my province. Perhaps you could talk about the value of investing in Canadian CSOs as opposed to international multilaterals.
Person, and I'd be very happy to talk about the value of investing in Canadian NGOs or Canadian civil society organizations. I think there's a number of benefits for working through Canadian CSOs. One, of course, is that with our long-term partnerships on the ground and our strong local capacity, we're working with people in country who know deeply over generations, over a long time period, what the issues are, and have their own ideas for solving them. So we get truly localized and long-term solutions. Another is that as Canadian civil society organizations with a strong support base across Canada, we can help to educate Canadians about the causes of poverty and some of the solutions to international development, and try to build support and understanding for the program. I've talking with many MPs, they often say Canadians just don't understand the problems of international development. And that's one of the things that we try hard to overcome, is to build that understanding and support. I think we're efficient at what we do. I think the cost factor is positive in our favor. But that's not to say that all money should flow through Canadian civil society organizations. I think there has to be a balance. There's certain things that UN systems do well. There's certain things that work best if they're done bilaterally, so government to government.
Absolutely.
But
Thank you.
We need that balance.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Hagerman. And I guess that goes a little bit to how Canadians perceive international development and humanitarian assistance. And so I have a question actually for Mr. Messenger. We have some polling results that World Vision did at the beginning of this pandemic through Abacus data that actually talks about how 88% of Canadians agree that our world is interconnected, and that until COVID is taken care of across the globe, it's going to impact Canadians. Can you talk a little bit about how you see Canadians, how Canadians recognize this, but yet we don't seem to see our government recognize the value in investing in international development to a greater level at this point?
Well, you're absolutely right. And not only are we seeing anecdotally that Canadians are generous and are interested in what's going on beyond their borders, but we have data like the survey that you referenced, that Canadians, that they understand that the needs are significant. If thinking about the needs of a girl in a refugee camp in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo or other places, they recognize the need and want to respond. What we have been hoping is that through this moment, and this is playing out in terms of our support for the commitment that our donors are making to continue to give, is that Canadians are seeing this moment not as a moment to turn inward and just be looking at what's on our table or where we are, but perhaps are understanding for the first time for many what it means to go into a grocery store and see empty shelves.
Yeah.
Understand for a moment to see what food insecurity might feel like, or perhaps the lack of access to education, which so many millions of girls and boys around the world face every day, or a lack of the ability to access clean water. So things that we take for granted, be able to wash our hands. If you're in the Rohingya refugee camp in Bangladesh, trying to find a clean water station is very challenging. But what we're seeing is actually Canadians aren't turning inward. They are being willing to expand more. The poll is showing that they're understanding that the world is actually smaller. And the challenge is being able to make those connections to say, let's understand that when we think about a response, our understanding of neighbor or family actually has to extend beyond our border. It helps us in the long run. A more stable world makes a more stable Canada. But it's also the right thing to do, and people are understanding what it means to walk in someone else's shoes.
So perhaps it's not necessarily that Canadians don't understand the value, perhaps it's that politicians don't necessarily understand the value. So I'll do my job to try to convince them to understand that. I have very little time, but I did want to ask Ms. Mirza, I know the incredible work that Plan International does. Could you talk a little bit about, during this very difficult, challenging time, could you talk about how your programming is aligning with our Feminist International Assistance Policy?
Yes, because we truly believe that, and we are seeing from data that's coming out recently, that this COVID has actually exponentially affected girls and women much more. And this is no different also in developing countries, because when, as Michael said about the school closures, people can see it here. But that can put millions of girls at risk of early marriage. One of the biggest issues that school closure does is people, when the girls cannot go back, they can be early married, or they can have early marriage and the access to reproductive and sexual reproductive health and rights, or all of those services are stopped. So the school is not just an education system, it's a protective environment for children. And I think more than ever, we all understand that. And as a Plan International, we have very strong gender transformative programming and measurement. And we talked about accountability. It's the measure, not only just demonstrating, but measuring and seeing what's the actually change happening among girls and boys, especially the girls. And we are able to demonstrate even during COVID that gender transformative approaches actually can be applied. And we are very pleased and very, very happy to see the Feminist International Policy of the Government of Canada, because it is not just the right thing to do as a NGO, but it's also economically good for the country and for the organization. Thank you.
Let's get a feminist foreign affairs policy now, shall we?
Thank you so much, Ms. McPherson, Ms. Mirza. Thank you. That brings us to the end of our scheduled time with our witnesses this afternoon. I would like to remind colleagues that it's perfectly open to them to direct, and in light of the short time that we've had today, to direct written questions through the clerk's office to witnesses. If there's any follow-up that you have or anything interesting that you would like to ask more questions on, please send them in writing, and the answers then become part of the committee's work. On our collective behalf, I would like to thank our witnesses from Plan International Canada, World Vision Canada, and the Canadian Food Grains Bank for their time this afternoon, for their expertise, and very importantly, for their incredibly important work around the world. Thank you so much for being with us. And with that, we stand adjourned until our next meeting. Thank you, colleagues.